everyone. Crystal Acosta, licensed professional counselor here, creator of Through the Eyes of a Therapist podcast and channel. Today, I want to react to a therapy scene from Grey's Anatomy. So let's get started.
I'm going to go off script here and admit something.
Oh, the therapist is starting off with self-disclosure. This could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? If she's a well-trained therapist who's following her ethical code and good training, hopefully this self-disclosure will be positive and tied to the client's problem.
I used to be the on-call social worker for Safe Haven. Moms and dads would drop their babies off at fire stations and I would get the call.
So I'm imagining that this parallel that she's trying to draw to witnessing abandonment or giving up children by their parents is related to Joe's story somehow. Another side note, I also really like how the therapist sat down next to Joe. There have been many times in my career where a client, especially kids, they get like dysregulated in their bodies and they want to like sit down on the floor or sit against the wall or something like that. And when it's safe and appropriate to kind of like approach, you can like sit next to them and kind of give them that like comfort. Because can you imagine like the therapist just sitting up here or like standing looking down to Joe? Like that would be inappropriate, I feel like. So sitting next to somebody who has brought themselves down to the floor and keeping your eye level at their eye level can help with co-regulation and a bunch of other things. But I think that this is good.
And no matter how fast I drove, by the time I got there, that baby would be wrapped in a warm blanket, some firefighter's arms, crowd around it.
Why are you telling me this?
You were 5 days old when your mother abandoned you.
Okay, so I think this is where this is going. I can't really remember this episode. I have a terrible memory for shows specifically, but I think that from what I recall, Joe was in foster care or was abandoned by her mom, and she's working through this with this therapist. However, I think that the parallel she's trying to draw, the therapist, right, is that the abandonment that she experienced when she was a baby is probably similar in feeling to the abandonment maybe or relationship issue or attachment issue that she's experiencing now as an adult. So let's see where this goes.
Your brain may not have a memory of her pulling her hand away from you, but your body does.
Okay, so this is totally giving The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk vibes. So in that book, there's a theory about like trauma and traumatic events and how when we experience a traumatic event, most of our sensory information about that traumatic event comes in through all of our nerves and our nerve endings, right? Which is connected to the spine, and then the spine's connected to like the bottom part of the brain and the amygdala and the survival mechanisms of the brain. So basically, to kind of break it down, is that even if our mind doesn't have a picture or our brain doesn't have words to put together to a traumatic event or to describe a traumatic event, our bodies can remember the event through sensation. And it could be that feeling where your heart drops to your stomach or a feeling of panic. And then all of that kind of sort of gets registered in the bottom back lower part of the brain, right? Not up here in the frontal lobe or whatever. So when maybe a kid is pre-verbal, right? Something happens when they are 5 days old, like in this clip, they will have a memory of that situation, but a memory through the body or a memory through like a sensation. So this is where I think this is going. And I really like that part of, I guess, like psychoeducation that this therapist is giving Joe, but also the show is giving to the rest of us.
And your body felt the same way in that diner when she pulled away and left you alone.
Right. So this is genius, right? Because she's very much using the self-disclosure of like her previous work at this Haven place, I guess, right? And she's talking about how she has witnessed a lot of like abandonment and a lot of like childhood trauma because of those separations between parents and their babies, and how she now can see this connection between, you know, Joe's memory, body memory, as a baby being left by her mom, and when she was later abandoned in life this same sensation came up for Joe.
That's why it hurts so much. Your body felt the same way it did when you were a baby, all over again.
Side note, this woman who's playing Joe is a really great actress. And I think that the therapist's tone is very gentle. I think that she's being very empathetic and still giving that psychoeducation, really driving home the point of this is where this feeling and sensation is coming from. It's coming from your past. Our relationships with caregivers matter, right? And the way that trauma is processed matters, right? And this is where maybe some of Joe's experiences are coming from. I guess her current experience is why she's in therapy now. This music's super dramatic. I just imagine. Can you imagine you're like really in therapy with a therapist, or you're a therapist with a client, and then there's like dramatic music in the back? Sorry.
And you were surrounded by love.
So she's also helping Joe as the client kind of like reframe the situation. Like, although you were abandoned, there were firefighters there were social workers there, and you still had arms wrapped around you. So even though it wasn't the arms of your caregiver, who unfortunately couldn't care for you for whatever reason, or didn't care for you for whatever reason and raise you, you still had some resilience because of your support network at that point, and you were still able to feel love in a different way. And so that's pretty cool.
Still are.
And pointing out that she's still loved.
Lose yourself inside the silhouette.
And I think that at the very end there, she just like looks at Joe and utilizes silence as a therapist appropriately, right? So when sometimes a client is making a breakthrough, like this clip is titled, how Joe is going through a breakthrough in therapy, you want to like shut your face as a therapist, like stop talking, like let the client absorb the point, let them relate it back to their own experiences. And then I would imagine that after this breakthrough and after the silence, the therapist will continue to debrief this moment with Joe so that Joe can really encode that into her psyche, into her life, and understand that point that she was trying to make about trauma responses. So I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you feel like this is an accurate portrayal of therapy? I feel like as a trauma therapist, a therapist who specializes in trauma treatment, I'm certified in EMDR, TFCBT, PCIT, and have worked with many adults and adolescents and individuals and families who have been through traumatic events. I feel like these breakthroughs sometimes happen. I'm not saying that they happen very, very often. They're not this obvious and acted out, I think, but you know, the proof is in the pudding, as they say, right? So when the client comes back and reports positive progress in like setting boundaries and being vulnerable in relationships and being in healthy relationships, those relationships being romantic or work relationships or friend relationships, and they come back and give you these reports of progress, I think that when some of these breakthroughs are more apparent. But I think that sometimes these things do happen in therapy where a client is like, yep, that makes sense. And you, therapist, your reframe hit me, you know, and it was great, right? And you can really tell that the client has absorbed the point and is integrating that into their brain. Tell me what you think. If you've been to therapy before, if you are a therapist, give me your feedback on this video and tell me what else I should react to. Again, if you do not know about the podcast, please go to Through the Eyes of a Therapist on any major podcatcher, Apple Podcasts, Google. You can ask your Alexa app to open Through the Eyes of a Therapist for you. And there are more than 70 episodes waiting for you to talk about therapy, to demystify it, and to humanize therapists. So again, I'm Crystal Acosta, licensed professional counselor, and this was Through the Eyes of a Therapist Reacts. See you at the next video. Like and subscribe.